Good afternoon, everyone. I've never given a lecture in this format before, people with headphones on, but we'll see how it goes. Thank you all for coming and visiting us here at the farm. I know it's an unlikely setting for an architecture practice, but we made our home here about 3 years ago. And we'd like to use this opportunity to tell you a little bit about where you're sitting and how it came about, and then move on to talking about kind of our sort of sustainability in practice on both a completed building and a forthcoming project. So our practice was founded actually following this project, which was an eco home in Wales, which Fergus and I designed straight out of part one, and this really kind of ignited our interest in sustainable design. It was a passive house using principles of solar thermal kind of design, using SIPS panels and a solar thermal energy store, and we were really kind of scrabbling at this point, kind of trying to understand what it meant to design sustainably, but it kind of set the kind of the DNA of the practice, I suppose. Since that point, sort of 9 years ago, we've worked on a whole fray of different projects, from education projects through to farms and factories. But we wanted to start by telling you a little bit about this place and how it came about.
Is this one working? Yes, good. So a few people might have spotted me down at the bottom of this in the studio throughout the day, but I've been sort of meeting people and telling you a bit about the site as people have popped in. But basically, we share the site with these two charities, Oasis Hub Waterloo and Jamie's Farm. And we've teamed up with the two of them as architects to design their spaces, and in return for the design we've put in, we've been able to build our studio at the far end of the site, which has studio space that we share with the charities as well. So it's quite an unusual spot. It was back pre-war. It was a series of terrace houses that ran all the way down facing Royal Street here. Then in the 80s, 90s, it was prefab buildings. And then when we came to it with the other two charities in 2014, it was an abandoned site. Lots of self-seeded trees, good old knotweed and all of that. So over the years, and with sort of a lot of fundraising efforts from the charities and input from ourselves as well, we've helped them to master plan the site. So the central street being the core idea to which these other buildings plug in. And we've roughly developed a building a year since those early days. So the animal pens were completed in 2015. The studio in 2016 and the barn in 2017. And each of them is a kind of iteration on the timber frame. So rustic in the case of the animal pens, but getting more refined as we go. And that's been a really great learning curve for the practice. So there's some shots of the farm in use, which I hope you've all been able to experience today. The pig's a bit smaller these days. But we really enjoy the fact that it's an incredibly unlikely thing, and we love welcoming people to the space when they've just come off Westminster Bridge Road or something, and it's a total surprise.
I think that the whole project has really been an opportunity to kind of distill our sort of environmental ambitions in a relatively kind of informal way. So this site has allowed us to experiment more with how we work with timber in a very primitive way, starting with the animal pens, but as Eleanor said, kind of generally kind of improving the refinement. And all of the buildings are demountable as well, so that was a really important part of the brief, that we would think carefully about the way that they were detailed, the way that they would both come to site and be dismantled and taken away from site. And our hope is that each of these buildings will have a future life on another site. Not least the farm hopefully will move to another site in London, and our own studio has been designed in a way that allows it to be flexible. So it may become a home in the future, it may become some classrooms, but the design of it is very kind of flexible. And here, as we're doing today, the barn has been used in many different ways, whether it's weddings or food markets. And I suppose that the whole site has really kind of encouraged our interest in a sort of broader thinking about sustainability, not just in terms of building sustainability and energy conservation, but also the kind of social sustainability that's so important, and how you encourage sort of the change of behaviours, let's say.
The sense of ownership is important as well in that, I think. And this thinking, the long-term thinking about how these structures can be reused in the future. So yeah, we were going to speak a little bit about the studio building, which touches on some of the themes we've already spoken about. But it really embodies a sense of leanness, I suppose. Being your own client focuses your mind in that way. But it's helped us, as Ed says, evolve our language about how we talk about sustainability and how the practice wants to represent itself in those terms. It's our manifesto, in a way.
The structure was really designed in section first and foremost, and just repeated 12 times. So in a way, kind of, as Eleanor said, the key driver was sort of leanness. How can you use the least material most effectively, the least cuts of your material, so you're wasting as little as possible. So the whole frame is set out based on sheet sizes, or actually two-thirds of a sheet of standard sort of plywood. And then the connections, as I mentioned earlier, are all based around being able to dismantle them very easily. So these are just pin connections, which is simply kind of knocked in and will be able to be knocked out and taken apart from the flitches. So the next slide shows the frame that will be able to be taken down and moved on to our future site, wherever that might be. A secondary set of trades came in and lined the space out, but likewise, everything's based on this sort of standard sheet size, sort of going up to sort of 2.4 meters here. So there's an economy in the way that all the components come together. And then this is the building kind of occupied with our team. And what's been amazing, sort of talking about that kind of broader idea of sustainability, surely kind of the most sustainable buildings are those that people love and enjoy and cherish. And the transformation of our team kind of moving to a space like this and having the opportunity to work outdoors at times, to work in the garden, to eat together, has been really kind of fantastic to see. And it's a kind of model that we're proud to be able to bring clients to show the site and sort of express this sort of holistic vision for a sustainable architecture, and then be able to implement that for their own projects when we can. So touching on a couple of projects, one that's completed, and finally we'll end on one that's...
if we don't wrap it up too long.
If we have time. So this is the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and this was our first public building that we designed. And for that reason, very important one for us to think carefully about. It's relatively easy to embody very sustainable values on a temporary site like this, on a city farm. But how do you translate some of those ideas and thinking into a permanent building that might have to be there for 100 plus years? And that was certainly the aspiration of the YSP. So as with our earliest project, T-Pren, we thought very carefully about the building siting, about a kind of passive solar approach to the design, embedding the building into the hillside so it had as little kind of impact on the natural setting as possible, using concrete as sparingly as we could, and in the places where it had real impact, so for retaining the earth, where it had to be concrete, and to create a kind of dramatic entrance to the building. But where we were able to use timber, we used a timber frame to frame the public spaces, the restaurant and cafe, the interpretation spaces.
Using the right material for the right job, I think, is the message.
And the other consideration, obviously, in a gallery building is the importance of daylighting. And here, there's a real sort of dynamic between the very calm, diffuse light that's created in the gallery space versus a very dramatic kind of southwest-facing elevation, which allows and celebrates the direct light. So in the gallery, we have these diffuse north lights, allowing a very even and controlled environment. But interestingly, on this project, we wanted to, we developed with the M&E engineer, Skelly and Cooch, quite a unique way of moderating the humidity in the building. And that was through a passive humidity buffer. So although it's not a very kind of visible environmental feature of the building, it's actually embedded within the wall. No one who visits the building would really perceive it. We kind of like the fact that we try and push for sustainability in all areas of the buildings, whether it's visible or not, or whether it's shouting about it or not. So within here, we have 10,000 unfired clay bricks. And they're a hygroscopic material, which means they can absorb moisture when it's very humid, and they give it out when it's not so humid, in a similar way to kind of lime products do, lime renders do in buildings. So it's an age-old kind of bit of science that people have known about for years, and it's great that we're beginning to kind of harness this in contemporary buildings. So,
as far as we're aware, it's the first time it's been used in a gallery space, and it's a really interesting example of a client taking a risk, I suppose, a client taking a chance on a technology that they're happy to be the pioneers on. And I think taking your client with you is one of the hardest things when you're an architect trying to create sustainable projects, and really winning them over into the narrative. But we were lucky in this case to have a client who was willing to take that chance. And so far, I believe it's successful, but they're monitoring it as in the first year of the building, I believe.
Yeah. Here are just a few pictures of the building in full swing and in use. And that kind of earthiness of the palette of materials sort of generated by using materials like the unfired clay brick found their way into the whole palette, whether that was sort of the Douglas fir timber, reminiscent of some of the buildings you'll see here, because it's kind of a narrative, I suppose, a process of learning from each of the buildings we designed here, and that found its way into this building and into the detailing of this building.
Probably all the way through to the concrete, which makes the most of natural local pigments. And that's something that Elaine helped us with some great advice en route as well.
Yeah, and sourcing local aggregates from the area, because its building was built in a quarry of millstone grit, so we sourced lots of the aggregate for the concrete walls from the surrounding area and from the site itself. So lots of these boulders you see strewn around the site are also just literally dug up as we were building the building. So finally, we wanted to touch on a current project. We've got 6 minutes, I think. So this is Homerton College in Cambridge, and I suppose for us this embodies so many of the values that we've been able to experiment with here on the farm, being a dining hall. So sort of food is really at the heart of this project, but it's also a project that the client wishes to be there for at least 200 years. So the design brief is 200 years, really, really long time to think about designing for. So these are some early kind of images of the building. The dining hall sits in one of the kind of courtyard spaces here, but right next to a kind of arts and crafts building. And the arts and crafts building was really the building that kind of gave us the inspiration for our kind of architectural response to the site, but also the spirit with which buildings were being made in the arts and crafts era, really celebrating craft and using that sort of celebration of materials to kind of promote the use of natural materials more broadly.
We've put this slide of these two images in because it was crucial that we thought about the internal environments, and for not only the students and staff, but equally for the kitchen staff, those people in the sort of steamy kitchen working all hours. We have to make sure that their experience is equally comfortable. And we worked really closely with Max Fordham's M&E engineers and also their sustainability team to sort of think through the typology of a building with a massive commercial scale kitchen space, and how we sort of started to question the BREEAM what's the word?
Certification.
The certification systems that something like BREEAM puts upon you, and how they might be well and good in relation to very typical buildings, but as soon as you've got something with an unusual factor like this kitchen or like an enormous dining space, they start to sort of creak a little bit, and you end up having to do strange things to get certain points, such as we ended up, because we did an early BREEAM test on the building, we ended up potentially having to take out bike racks in order to put in bike racks to get the points for bike racks, which is just silly.
So we were kind of encouraged to look more broadly. That sort of last diagram shows that actually kind of agriculture and food have at least as much, if not greater impact as building energy use itself. So there are kind of broader aspects outside of the kind of natural comfort zone of architects that we're certainly keen to think more about. And in this project, we decided with Max Fordham's to use a bespoke sustainability target in order to be able to design certain sustainability ambitions for the college, down to how they're going to kind of develop their menus, how they'll kind of deal with food wastage. And the college were very kind of really kind of innovative in their thinking, saying, well, we're going to be making a new building here. How do we this can change behaviours of our students.
New building, new start in a way.
Yeah, so they want it to be a kind of real kind of manifesto for the college, this new building. And so we've designed this quite broad, bespoke sustainability matrix, which we're monitoring the development of the scheme against.
Some of which the titles come from the BREEAM subheadings, but as Ed mentioned, things like the food sourcing is something that is more bespoke to this project, but equally important in the lifespan of the building.
So here we see a kind of axo of the kind of, I suppose, tectonic approach to the building. So using long-lasting materials externally, we're using a kind of faience terracotta cladding, but internally where we can, where it's well protected, we're using timber for the primary roof structures for the whole building, and the hall itself is framed out in timber. And this was actually a point of real, we'd like to sort of touch on in a bit more detail. As Eleanor was saying earlier, it's really important, the kind of advocacy that architects have, and they're encouraging their clients to be as green as they possibly can. And it's our job as a design team to kind of put forward some of the arguments for using perhaps more locally sourced material as opposed to European sourced.
This was an example of how we tried to demonstrate to the client, don't take a picture of it, might be wrong. But we used this to measure up a European sourced oak with a locally sourced sweet chestnut, which the design team were backing. But as that nature of client has to be very answerable to a number of bodies. I mean, financially, they've got to be able to support the decisions they make. Their student body is very much an audience crying out to make sure the green credentials of their new building are appropriate. And I think the client team at the college knew that they had all these people to answer to. So we had to put into a matrix almost our reasons for supporting a certain decision to allow them to be able to advocate for it as well. So we've broken down with the help of the design team, everything from cost through to workability of the material, from a structural point of view, the origins, the distance it would come, and the transport that would
as
take.
You can see, the sweet chestnut option, which is a sort of homegrown kind of sweet chestnut glue lamb from the southern counties, isn't by any means the cheapest option for the college, and yet because of the way that the scoring has been weighted, it's allowed us to come out fractionally
enough
on top. So I think it's just one example of many kind of decisions that you have to make as an architect, and kind of calibrations of a building.
And arguments to make, winning people around and giving them the ammunition to protect their decisions against people who will question their decisions.
Yeah. And so we'll just end now on a couple of slides of the kind of what the building hopefully should look like. This is a model of the hall itself. But I suppose to conclude, I suppose where we're trying to improve, and it was interesting that the last speaker touched on this, is really kind of getting into the numbers of post-occupancy. And actually through these larger projects, we're being afforded the resources, and there's the kind of the pressure on colleges from their students and so on to be very transparent about the performance of their buildings. So certainly in this project, through the bespoke sustainability matrix, we're going to be reporting on how it performs when it's built. At YSP as well, we're looking at the performance, for example, of that humidity buffer. So I think that's one area we absolutely kind of support, that architects need to get much better at kind of
iterative learning. It all comes back to the iterative learning. Same with the timber frames, same with the technologies we're putting in out, and also the ability to share them. Thank you.